I've driven this road for 20 years, the same road my father and I built with our own hands. But that day, I came home to find an HOA gate blocking my land, and a man I'd never seen before resting his hand on a gun, telling me I needed permission to reach my own house. Right then, I knew this wasn't a neighbor dispute. This was war. I had been driving for almost an hour when that old feeling started creeping in. The one wired into me after 2 tours overseas. Not fear, not nerves, just awareness. A quiet, steady voice in the back of my mind telling me the world ahead wasn't lining up with the world I'd left behind that morning. The Nevada sun was hanging high and bright, a white-hot disk pressed against a washed-out sky. Heat shimmered off the hood of my truck as it rolled over the first stretch of my private road. The bed was loaded down with lumber, fencing wire, and 2 heavy concrete bags I'd picked up in Henderson, enough to fix the sagging post by the water tank and reinforce the north paddock. I'd been putting those repairs off for weeks. When you live alone on 40 acres of stubborn desert land, chores multiply faster than you can chase them. But today felt like a day to get something done, a day to feel like the land and I were finally on the same page again. Because this road, this 9-mile path cut through rock, dust, and memory, is more than a road. It's the spine of my entire life. My father and I carved the first mile back when I still had dust on my knees from climbing trees. His old Ford rattled like a bucket full of bolts, but he trusted that thing more than he trusted most people. I remember standing on the torn passenger seat, pointing out where he should dump the next load of gravel. Sometimes he'd stop the truck, kneel down, scoop a handful of dirt, and rub it between his fingers. "Roads aren't built by machines, son," he'd say. "They're built by people who need them." I didn't get it then. Not until after the war, after coming back to a country that felt familiar but somehow wrong around the edges. Only then did I understand why this road mattered, why it grounded me. This road didn't pretend, didn't judge, didn't make promises it couldn't keep. It just led me home. I knew every rise and dip, every rut scarred by flash floods, every curved shadow of sagebrush along the edges. I'd patched washouts, dug new culverts, replaced rotted fence posts one by one. I'd driven this road in heat, snow, dust storms, and more nights than I can count. Sometimes with one headlight, sometimes half asleep, sometimes bleeding, but always, always, it was mine, which is why the shape looming ahead made no sense at all. A metallic glint in the distance, too straight, too smooth, too clean to be anything the desert had the patience to build. I eased off the gas. The truck drifted forward, slow, steady. At first I thought maybe a delivery truck had broken down, or a county utility crew checking lines. But then the wind shifted, and the heat mirage peeled away like a curtain. A bright aluminum gate, a red and white striped arm stretched across the center of my road. A prefab security booth bolted onto a concrete pad that hadn't existed yesterday. I slowed the truck to a crawl, and just like that, my pulse didn't spike. It settled, slow, cold, that familiar combat focus slipping over me like an old, well-worn jacket. I stared at the thing standing in my way. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. And in that quiet stretch of desert, with the sun beating down and the horizon holding its breath, I knew whatever was waiting for me beyond that gate wasn't going to be simple. The desert has a way of telling you when something doesn't belong. It doesn't shout, doesn't warn. It simply waits, silent and patient, until you notice the lie sitting right in front of you. And that gleaming aluminum gate was a lie. Every inch of it, too straight, too clean, too proud of itself, stood out like a fresh coat of paint on an old gravestone. The desert hadn't made that thing. Someone else had, someone who didn't know a damn thing about this land. I rolled the truck forward until the shape beside the booth sharpened into a man. Uniform crisp, boots spotless, cleaner than any boot had the right to be after walking even 30 seconds on this road. Sunglasses hiding half his face, posture stiff like he practiced it in front of a bathroom mirror. His hand rested on the top of a holster, not exactly threatening, but not neutral either, just waiting. I killed the engine. The silence fell heavy, the kind you could almost feel sitting on your shoulders. For a few seconds, neither of us said a word. 2 men, 1 strip of land, and only one of us had the right to stand there. I opened the door and stepped out slowly. Gravel crunched under my boots, loud in the stillness. My shoulders stayed loose, breathing even. That calm wasn't something I forced. It was something the battlefield had carved into me long ago. Trouble never made me panic. It made me precise. The man didn't greet me, didn't nod, didn't even adjust his stance. He just watched me approach like I was an item on a checklist. "You planning on moving that gate?" I asked, voice steady. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to a bright metal sign bolted onto a new steel post. "Private community access, HOA members only, no unauthorized entry." I read it once, then looked back at him. "This is my road," I said plainly. His voice came out flat and cold, like a DMV clerk who had been left in the sun too long. "Sir, Silver Ridge Estates now manages this section under a municipal maintenance contract. I'll need to see your access permit." An access permit to drive on my own land. The absurdity almost made me smile. Almost. Instead, I walked a step closer, slow, deliberate, hands visible. "That so?" I said. "Yes, sir," he repeated, jaw stiff. "Funny. I don't remember giving your HOA permission to install a gate on my road." He shifted his weight just slightly. Not much, just a subtle repositioning of his hips. But I'd seen that movement before, overseas, more times than I'd like to count. It wasn't nervousness, it was preparation. "Sir," he said again, "if you don't have your permit, you'll need to turn around." Turn around. On the road my father and I built. On the land I'd paid taxes on since the 90s. On a route no one else had maintained, not once. Inside me, something settled. Not anger, not fear, just a steady, cold certainty. "You're standing on private property," I told him calmly. "And before you say another word, you should understand that." His jaw flexed. He knew I was right, but he wasn't here to be right. He was here to follow orders. I turned and walked to the truck, still slow, still controlled. I opened the passenger door, reached behind the seat, and pulled out a worn leather folio. Inside it, I kept everything: maps, deeds, receipts, and a rugged field tablet I used for land overlays. I let him see every movement. I flipped open the folio, powered on the tablet, and brought up the cadastral maps, parcel overlays, boundaries, tax numbers. Then I held the tablet up. "Here," I said, "Clark County Recorder's data. Parcel B through B27. That road," I tapped in the glowing screen, "runs straight through my land." He didn't look. "Sir," he repeated, "I can't let you through." Then he said it, the sentence that crossed the line from annoyance into threat. "Orders from the HOA board." A man can only be told he's a trespasser on his own land so many times before something older wakes up inside him. I stepped closer, voice low, calm, final. "You can move that gate," I said, "or I can move you, your choice." For the first time he hesitated, then his fingers dropped to the holster. Pop! The retention snap broke open. A small sound, sharp and final. And in that exact second, everything that came next wasn't a decision. It was muscle memory. Training older than his badge, older than his uniform, older than whatever story he'd been fed about this land. There's a moment, right between intention and action, when a man shows you exactly who he really is. For him, it was the pop of that retention snap. For me, it was the calm that followed. Time didn't slow down. It sharpened. He inhaled like he was about to say something. Maybe a warning, maybe a command, maybe just one more sentence he wasn't qualified to speak on my land. But none of it mattered, because I moved. Not fast, not frantic, just efficient. The kind of efficiency trained into you through repetition, sweat, and the understanding that hesitation is a luxury you can't afford. My hand shot forward, clamping around his wrist before his fingers could clear the holster. A sharp twist, controlled, practiced. His stance collapsed. I stepped inside his balance, dropped my weight, and guided him over my shoulder. His boots left the ground. His sunglasses arced through the air. And then, thud. He hit the dirt flat on his back. The air ripped from his lungs in a broken, dusty wheeze. The desert absorbed the sound the way it absorbs everything, quietly, indifferently. He tried to reach for his radio, but the fall had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. His hand shook, his eyes blinked rapidly. His pride worked harder than his lungs. I stood over him, steady, barely winded. "Stay down," I said. Not a suggestion, an order. He froze the way a man freezes when he suddenly understands he has been playing a role he was never qualified for. You attacked me," he rasped. "No," I corrected, voice calm, even. "You popped the snap on your holster on my land." I defended myself. His jaw clenched, but there was no conviction behind it. He knew the truth, and so did I. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and began snapping photos. The booth, the unauthorized gate, the sign, the concrete pad, and the man sprawled in the dirt, half disabled by his own arrogance. I documented everything, not out of anger, out of experience. A man who's been burned by bureaucracy knows that evidence is the only shield that never fails. He tried sitting up, groaning as he held his ribs. "You can't go through," he choked out. I didn't look at him as I walked back to my truck, didn't bother arguing, didn't need to. "This isn't your call," I said, climbing into the driver's seat, "and you're on the wrong side of the wrong fight." The engine rumbled to life beneath me. There was a patch of dirt to the right, narrow, uneven, squeezed between two stubborn desert shrubs, but just wide enough for someone who knew the terrain. And I knew this road better than the lines on my own hand. I eased the truck around the kiosk. Gravel kicked up behind the tires in a dusty wave. His fancy gait meant nothing out here. As I passed him, I leaned slightly out the open window. "Next time," I said quietly, "don't reach for something you're not ready to use." The look on his face wasn't anger. It was realization, and maybe a little fear. He'd learned something important that day, perhaps the first real lesson of his job. I drove the remaining 2 miles home without music, without radio, without a single distraction. The desert's silence wasn't comforting now. It was expectant, heavy, like the land itself sensed the coming storm. When I reached my driveway, I parked beside the barn and stepped inside my office, a small converted storage room with a crooked window and walls lined with tools and documents. The fan above rattled like an old engine, pushing warm air around without conviction. I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's direct line, a number I'd had for 10 years. It rang once, twice, 3 times, 4, then clicked to voicemail. Strange, Sheriff Miller usually picked up for locals, especially on a Tuesday. I left a message, short, calm, precise. Then I called the one person I knew would answer, Nolan Burns, my land use attorney out of Reno. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Tell me you're sitting down," I said. "I am," he replied, "but judging by your tone, I'm not going to like whatever comes next." He didn't. Within hours, I had every camera feed on my property redirected to watch the entrance road. Every deed, every survey, every land document backed up to 3 cloud accounts. Nolan began drafting an emergency cease and desist letter, sharpened like a knife. But anger wasn't what filled me, not yet. What filled me was a familiar certainty. The same certainty I used to feel right before a mission overseas. The first shot had already been fired. The HOA thought they'd put up a gate. They didn't realize they'd just opened one, into a fight they weren't prepared for. And by stepping onto my land, they'd chosen the wrong man to stand against. The next morning, the desert didn't greet me like it usually did. No quiet welcome, no familiar stillness, just something off. A wrongness sitting in the air, waiting. A feeling I used to get in places where the ground held secrets and the wind didn't blow quite right. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and let the cold air bite at my face. The sun was barely a line on the horizon, the sky still holding on to the last dark shade of dawn. That's when I heard them, tires on gravel, slow, deliberate, not the friendly kind. 2 county patrol cars rolled down my driveway like they already knew the ending to the conversation we hadn't had yet. They parked clean, straight, doors opening with cold precision. 2 deputies stepped out, one tall, squared shoulders, mirrored sunglasses even though the sun hadn't shown itself. The other younger, jittery under the uniform, trying not to look like the rookie he was. The younger one, Reed, unconsciously shifted left, triangulating. His hand hovered a few inches from his belt. Not gripping the gun, not yet, but close enough for the message to land. He'd been told I was dangerous before he ever saw my face. I didn't move, didn't tense, didn't change expression. "Morning," I said. The tall one, Holler, didn't return the courtesy. He glanced once at my coffee as if checking for alcohol. "Mr. Briggs," he said. "That's me." "I'm Deputy Holler. This is Deputy Reed. We need to ask you a few questions regarding an incident yesterday involving a contracted security officer." "Contracted security officer?" I repeated. "You mean the man who put a gate on my land and reached for his weapon?" Reed's fingers twitched closer to his holster. Holler didn't blink. "We received a report of battery," Holler said flatly. "Unprovoked assault." I took a slow sip of coffee. "You get that report from the dirt? Or from the HOA that hired him?" Reed stiffened. Holler kept his jaw locked. "Sir, we need your statement." "My statement's real simple," I said. He unsnapped his retention strap and escalated. Nevada statute makes that threat clear as day. For the first time, a crack showed behind Holler's sunglasses. Annoyance, not with the law, with the fact that I knew it. "His weapon remained holstered," Holler recited. "The snap wasn't," I countered, "and you know what that means." A long second passed, then Holler shifted the conversation like flipping a switch. "You're aware the HOA has temporary authority over disputed infrastructure." "That road isn't disputed," I said. "Their map is forged. I've got surveys older than both of you combined." Reed finally spoke, voice fast and unsure. "Sir, until the county finalizes review, you're advised not to interfere with HOA operations in that section." I lowered my mug. "You're telling me not to drive on my own land?" "No," Holler said, tone tightening. "We're telling you not to escalate this." There it was, the word again, used like a hammer, like I was the problem. I didn't answer. I just walked toward the old tool shed and gestured for them to follow. Inside, I pulled down the framed yellowed survey map. "This is Parcel Bean, recorded 98, tax number 749833. Road's been mined long before any HOA sprouted out here." Reed scribbled notes, unsure. Holler didn't look twice. "We don't adjudicate boundaries," Holler said. "Take it up with the property board." "No," I replied quietly, "but you do enforce trespassing." Silence. Holler exhaled, not impatient, condescending. "We'll file our report," he said, heading toward the door. "Expect follow-up." Then he paused, turned back, took 2 slow steps toward me, and when he spoke again, his voice changed, softened. Patronizing, a tone men use with someone holding scissors the wrong way. "And Mr. Briggs," he said gently. I waited. "Look, we know men with your background can find sudden disputes stressful." The word background hung in the air like a stain. Reed watched me carefully, as if waiting for me to snap, like they had already been briefed I might. Holler continued, voice dripping with false concern. "Just try to keep a level head, all right? For everyone's safety. We don't want any episodes." Episodes. There it was, the narrative, the HOA's favorite lie, now coming out of a badge. I set the coffee mug down, slow and deliberate. "I didn't escalate anything," I said, voice flat as stone, "but make sure the HOA understands something." I stepped a little closer, not threatening, just present. "I defend what's mine." Reed's hand hovered just a little closer to his belt. Holler's jaw tightened, like he'd confirmed a diagnosis. Neither said another word. They left the shed and walked back to their cruisers. When the engines rumbled to life and the tires cracked over the gravel, a cold wind blew across the desert, sharp enough to sting. I watched the cruisers disappear beyond the bend. Then I walked back into the house, set the empty mug on the counter, and stood still, listening. Not to the wind, not to the quiet, to that old instinct, the one that never lied. And right then, it told me exactly what I already knew. They weren't done, not even close. The desert was quiet that afternoon, too quiet for my taste. The kind of quiet where a man starts listening between the seconds, not to the sounds themselves. The kind of quiet where trouble isn't in front of you yet, but it's close, close enough to taste. I was tightening the hinges on my front gate when I heard tires on the county road. Not fast, not reckless, just creeping along at that perfect speed people use when they're filming something. I didn't turn around, didn't need to. I could feel eyes on my back before the engine even shut off. A sedan, silver, too clean for the desert. I heard doors open, then whispers. A phone camera clicked on, loud enough for me to hear the little pop of the recording start. I wiped my hands on a rag and finally faced them. 3 of them, mid-50s, soft shoes, HOA posture, back straight like they were balancing a book of bylaws on their heads. And leading them, Janice Mallory, HOA board secretary, expert in passive-aggressive warfare, the type who called the county once because my tractor disrupted the neighborhood's acoustic harmony. She stepped forward, holding her phone sideways like she'd seen reporters do on TV. "Mr. Briggs," she said, voice sugar-coated but buzzing like a trapped fly. "We're here to document your behavior. For the record." "For the record," I repeated, scratching the back of my neck. "I'm on my own property, fixing my own gate. You want to step back 3 feet before I swing this hinge into your teeth?" One of the men gasped, too dramatic to be real. Janice didn't flinch. "No need to threaten violence," she said, tilting the phone slightly. "You're being recorded." I smiled, a slow, tired smile. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "if I were threatening violence, you wouldn't have to ask." Her smile twitched, just enough for me to see it. She lifted her chin. "We're concerned," she said loudly for the camera, "about your mental state. With everything going on, these outbursts are worrying the community." Outbursts. There it was again. The HOA's favorite word, right up there with safety and policy. "Who's worried?" I asked. "The neighborhood," she said. "There is no neighborhood," I said. "Just my land, and then that cluster of overpriced matchboxes you call houses." Her nostrils flared, but she kept filming. Behind her, one of the men edged into the frame and forced a tremble into his voice. "We don't feel safe around you, Mr. Briggs." I stared at him, a long, cold stare that stripped every layer of fake fear off him, like peeling old paint. Then I spoke softly. "Son, if you truly felt unsafe, you wouldn't be standing this close." His mouth opened, closed. He swallowed hard. Janice pivoted the camera to capture his discomfort, like she'd just scored a point. "This is exactly the kind of intimidation we're documenting," she said. I didn't answer. I just reached into my pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my own phone. Janice's eyes widened just a fraction. "Recording me?" she asked. "No," I said, tapping the screen. "Recording everything." The phone beeped, a tiny sound, but it changed the air instantly, because I wasn't aiming the camera at their faces. I was aiming it at their car, at the partially covered logo of Silver Ridge Estates Maintenance Division, a division the HOA invented themselves, with no county recognition, at the papers on their dashboard, the printed script on Janice's clipboard, the extra phone mounted on the sedan's headrest, already recording before they even stepped out. Janice's confidence flickered. "Your actions are being documented for the board," she said sharply. "And your stage performance," I replied, "is being documented for my attorney." She blinked, hard. One of the men stepped forward. "You threatened us yesterday at the gate," he said. "We have it on video." "Post it," I said. "I'd love the county to see your man drawing on me first." Silence swept across the group like a cold gust. They didn't expect that answer. People who build narratives rarely do. I lowered my phone, let it hang by my side, and then I did something small, so small they barely noticed. But something that changed everything. I looked past them, not at their car, not at the road, at the sky. Janice followed my gaze. A tiny dot in the distance, barely noticeable, but moving. My drone, returning home. I had launched it 10 minutes earlier, routine perimeter check, but to them, they didn't know that. Their eyes darted upward. "What is that?" Janice asked, her voice finally cracking. "That?" I said. "Just making a record of every time your board steps onto my land." The men glanced at each other. "Is that even allowed?" one murmured. "Is trespassing allowed?" I countered. Nobody answered. Janice lowered her phone first. Not by choice, her hand was shaking. She tried to recover with one final line for the camera. "This harassment will be added to the report," she snapped. I shrugged. "Be sure to spell my name right." And with that they retreated, quick, awkward steps, bumping into each other like grocery carts. The sedan door slammed. The engine sputtered. Gravel spat from the tires as they pulled away faster than they intended. I watched them go until the dust settled. Then I walked back to the porch, pulled out a notebook, and began writing down everything. Time, faces, license plate, behavior, exact words spoken, positioning, noise of their engine, direction they came from. Not because I was paranoid, because I was a soldier once. And soldiers learn the same lesson again and again. When someone tries to write your story for you, you'd better start keeping your own records. That night, the desert cooled fast, too fast for early spring. I sat alone at the kitchen table, a pool of warm lamplight spreading across notebooks, printouts, and my phone. Someone had sent me the HOA's evidence video. It was supposed to make me look unstable. I hit play. The first thing that hit me wasn't the words. It was the sound. Too clean. Too smooth, like somebody had ironed the audio flat. I rewound, slowed it. Janice's voice had tiny jumps, breaths missing, syllables clipped, unnatural pauses. Amateurs always forget. Fear is messy. Real fear trembles. It stutters. This fear? It was rehearsed. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing. At the 14-second mark, a man stepped into frame, his shadow falling across Janice's shoulder. Except it didn't match the angle of the sun. Wrong direction, wrong length, wrong softness. A stitched-in shadow. I felt something old and cold settle low in my gut. The same feeling I used to get when walking into a village, and the silence told me something was wrong before anything else did. They weren't just provoking me. They were manufacturing a narrative. I opened my drone footage. It had caught more than I expected. Janice practicing lines. The man beside her whispering directions. Both of them stepping toward my property line, then jumping back when I turned my head. I clipped screenshots, marked timestamps, built a folder titled HOA Fabrication, Master File. But even as I worked, something kept tugging at me. The way they spoke, the sudden push from the sheriff, the forced politeness, like they'd been coached. This wasn't random. Someone with influence was behind this, and influence always leaves fingerprints. I pushed back from the table and stood up. Sitting here analyzing wasn't enough anymore. If they were forging videos, they might be forging documents too. And forged documents don't live online. They live in filing cabinets. I checked the clock. 9:42 p.m. It can wait until morning, I muttered. But sleep didn't come easy. Didn't come at all, really. By the time the sun rose, I was already standing in front of the Clark County Records office. It sat wedged between a bail bond storefront and a vape shop. Two signs civilization was quietly giving up on itself. The building smelled like old paper, cheaper carpet glue, and too much air freshener. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered like they were fighting a losing battle. A woman at the counter looked up from her computer, pushing her glasses down her nose. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said. "Road maintenance petitions, parcel maps, anything filed in the last 6 months involving Silver Ridge Estates or the North Access Corridor." Her expression tightened, subtle but real. The same expression people wear when you mention the name of someone they wish they didn't know. "I can't comment on active land use reviews," she said carefully, "but I can bring the files. That's all I need." She disappeared into the back room. I waited. My boots echoed softly on the cracked tile as I paced. The room felt colder than it should have. Bureaucratic cold. The kind that hides behind forms and signatures. Finally, she returned with a stack of manila folders, too thick for a simple maintenance petition. I took them to a corner desk, sat down, and began flipping through pages. And there it was. My heart didn't drop. It hardened. The HOA's petition claimed, under penalty of perjury, that my road was abandoned, unmaintained, and hazardous to nearby residents. Attached was a parcel map, a shiny one, too shiny, drawn with a newer mapping template the county hadn't even adopted yet. I held the map up to the light. Lot lines were shifted, subtle, but enough to place a stretch of my road outside my deeds and inside a so-called community corridor. Convenient. Surgical. Criminal. I flipped to the next page. A signature sat at the bottom. Edward Mallory, Assistant Director, Municipal Infrastructure Review. Except the signature didn't match the file 3 places earlier where he'd signed 6 months ago. Different slant, different pressure, different looping on the M. I'd seen forged signatures before. Overseas, stateside. Anyone who works long enough around corruption learns to smell it. This reeked. I dug deeper into the file and found something worse. An internal memo stapled to the back with a printed note, "For expedited consideration, stamped, approved, fast-tracked, by Mallory." My jaw tightened, tendons pulling tight. They weren't planning to steal my road. They'd already filed the paperwork. They thought they'd win before I even knew the fight started. I stood up and walked back to the counter. "I need copies of all this," I said. The woman swallowed. "That's a lot of pages, and I'll have to charge—" I put cash on the counter. "Print everything." She hesitated, glancing nervously toward the back room, as if someone might step out and scold her. But no one came. She printed the whole stack. When she handed me the copies, she leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't get this from me." I nodded once. She stepped back like she'd said too much. Outside, sunlight hit me hard. The desert wind carried grit across the parking lot, tiny stinging flecks against my cheek. I sat inside my truck, spread the papers on the steering wheel, and stared at the forged signature again. That knot in my chest? It didn't tighten this time. It unraveled, straight into anger. Not hot, not loud, cold, focused. The kind of anger that built careers in the Marines. I took a photo of the forged map, a photo of the fake signature, a photo of the memo. Then I texted Nolan 3 images and 3 words. Found the truth. His reply came 30 seconds later. Get home. We're going to war. I folded the documents, set them on the passenger seat, started the engine, and for the first time since this began, I felt something like satisfaction. They finally slipped. And I'd caught it. The feed store was quiet that afternoon, just the hum of the old ceiling fan and the sweet dusty smell of hay pellets stacked high against the wall. I came in for a 50-pound salt block and some mineral mix for the cattle, something normal, something simple, the kind of errand a man handles when he needs his mind to settle. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and that's when I noticed him, leaning near the coolers, pretending to study a bottle of iced tea. Mid-30s, too clean, too polished for ranch country, boots that had never seen manure, beard manicured like a YouTube lifestyle coach. He didn't belong here. He watched me out of the corner of his eye. When I hoisted the salt block up onto the counter, he finally approached, with a smile that didn't know how to be honest. "Excuse me," he said. "You're Briggs, right?" I didn't answer. People who know you never ask like that. He extended a hand anyway. "I'm Tyler. I run a podcast, Fields of Valor. We interview veterans adjusting to civilian life." There it was, the hook. I let his hand hang in the air. "A podcast," I said flatly. "Yeah." His grin widened like a salesman spotting a weak customer. "We highlight the struggles vets face. Anger issues, past trauma, the hard stuff." He watched my face carefully, studying, measuring, trying to locate a trigger. "We'd love to have your story," he continued. "I heard there was an altercation near your property line recently. Must have been hard. Brings up memories sometimes, doesn't it?" My fingers tightened slightly around the salt block. Just slightly. He saw it, and his smile sharpened. He thought he had found a crack. "Yes," he said softly, lowering his voice like he was comforting a patient. "Men with your background often carry things. Some people call it PTSD. No shame in that. When the world corners you, it can be hard to stay stable." There it was, the script, not his, someone else's. HOA fingerprints all over it. My jaw didn't clench, my breathing didn't hitch. Instead, something older woke up inside me. The part of my brain that used to scan Afghan markets for concealed wires and glances that lasted half a second too long. The part that sees the world in angles, exits, and intentions. I noticed a small black mark on the inside of his jacket pocket. Wiring from a lapel mic, barely visible, amateur work. I noticed the way his eyes flicked too often toward the parking lot. I noticed the SUV outside idling too long, windows too dark. Driver pretending to scroll a phone but never moving his thumb. A setup, a provocation. They wanted footage of a veteran losing his temper. They wanted the narrative, the headline, the talking point at the next HOA meeting. Unstable Marine threatens civilian. Tyler leaned in a little closer. "What was the hardest part over there?" he asked gently. "Did you ever lose control? Ever hurt someone you didn't mean to?" My heartbeat didn't spike. It slowed, cold and smooth, like settling into an old weapon stance. I looked him dead in the eyes. "You want to turn off your recorder," I said quietly. His smile twitched. "I'm not recording. You're wearing a next make Model 4 lapel mic. Battery pack is under your shirt, poorly concealed." He swallowed. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a calm, steady murmur, just for him. "You see that SUV outside? The one your buddy's sitting in, pretending to text? He's using the front camera as a live stream. Lens is smudged at the corner." Tyler's face went pale. He hadn't expected the prey to study the hunter. I leaned one elbow on the counter, casual, relaxed, because relaxed is what terrifies men like him most. "Let me guess," I said. "The HOA hired you. Told you to poke around, push old memories, get a reaction on tape, maybe make me yell, maybe make me look unstable." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. They're scared, I continued, so they're trying to build a story, a fragile one. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a small, square device. One most civilians never notice. A signal disruptor, legal, portable, harmless, but it makes wireless mics cut out like cheap fireworks. I clicked a button. His lapel mic gave a tiny, pathetic pop. Tyler gasped and covered it with his hand, like a man holding a dying pet. "You should head back to your SUV," I said calmly, "and tell whoever hired you that I'm done being polite. If they want to play psychological games, tell them I've played better ones in worse places." Tyler swallowed, Adam's apple trembling like a loose hinge. Then he turned and practically jogged out of the store. Through the window, I watched him wave frantically at the SUV driver. The SUV peeled away so fast it kicked gravel against the feed store's windows. The clerk behind the counter stared at me. "You know that guy?" "Nope," I said, lifting the salt block. "But he knows me now." I walked out into the sunlight, the weight of the salt block solid in my hands, and watched the dust cloud from the fleeing SUV drift across the road. Another move on their chessboard, sloppy, desperate, and it told me one thing. HOA wasn't trying to win. They were trying to break me, which meant they were running out of options. By the time I pulled back into my driveway, the dust cloud from the PI's fleeing SUV had already settled somewhere down the highway. The ranch felt quiet again, the kind of quiet that makes a man suspicious, not comforted. I carried the feed into the barn, checked the water lines, ran a quick look over the fence line. The usual routines. Little things that keep your hands busy while your brain does the real work. But something was off. When I walked back toward the porch, I saw it sitting on the top step. A large, flat courier envelope, bright white, too clean for ranch country. No return address, no note, just my full name typed neatly on a sticker. That alone told me it wasn't from a neighbor. I picked it up and felt the weight. Several pages, thick paper stock, legal documents. Of course. I tore the top carefully and slid the paperwork out. The title on the first page read, Mutual Use and Access Agreement, Silver Ridge Estates, HOA, Mutual Use. That was rich. I scanned the first few lines, and my stomach tightened, not out of fear, but out of recognition. I'd seen this tactic overseas, insurgent groups offering truce agreements that secretly tied villages to their control, a peace offering that leaves you in chains. I took a breath, set the papers on the kitchen table, and called Nolan. He picked up on the first ring. "You sound tense," he said. "They left me a present," I replied. "Mutual access agreement." There was a pause, then a low, humorless laugh. "Oh, those idiots." "Mind walking me through it?" I asked. "Sure. Page 1, they'll pretend it's about safety and cooperation. Page 2, they'll say shared oversight benefits everyone. Page 3 is where the knife is." I flipped to page 3. Just like he said, Silver Ridge Estates HOA shall retain administrative review authority over all structural, operational, and maintenance modifications pertaining to the access route. I whistled under my breath. "You see it?" Nolan asked. "Oh, I see it. They weren't asking to share the road. They were asking for permanent veto power over any modification I made, digging a ditch, repairing washouts, replacing gravel, even widening turns." "You sign that," Nolan said, "and they won't need petitions. They won't need fake maps. You'll have handed them control willingly. The road becomes a de facto community asset, and I'd still be the one maintaining it." "Exactly. It's slavery with asphalt." I flipped another page. Section 7, Enforcement Authority. Silver Ridge Estates HOA reserves the right to employ private contractors for monitoring, compliance checks, and roadway access oversight. I stopped reading. Nolan didn't. "They sneak in their checkpoint," he said. "If you sign this, they can rebuild that little gatehouse of theirs, and this time legally. Hell, they'll say you agreed to it." I rubbed a hand slowly across my jaw. "And the last section?" I asked. "Let me guess. Some line about dispute resolution?" I looked. Section 10. Binding arbitration. All disputes arising under this agreement shall be resolved through arbitration by a community-selected panel. "Not a court," I murmured. "Right. Arbitration, which means a panel of HOA-friendly neutrals. You'll lose before you open your mouth." I picked up the whole stack of papers, let the weight settle in my hands. This is their peace offering, I said. No, Nolan corrected. This is their surrender disguised as peace. They're panicking. Because the PI stunt failed, I said. Because everything is failing, Nolan replied. And a cornered animal becomes dangerous. This is them trying to wrap the noose in velvet. I sat down at the table, staring at the text. They thought this would fool me, I said softly. They thought you were just a rancher, Nolan replied. Not a man who reads contracts for sport. We sat quietly for a moment, the line humming faintly. Then Nolan spoke again, voice quieter. Briggs, this is when they're most unpredictable, when the lies start collapsing and they don't know what you know. I know one thing, I said. What? They're scared of what comes next. Nolan exhaled. And they should be. I folded the document slowly, deliberately, the way you fold a flag, crisp lines, precise corners. Then I slid it back into the envelope. And the official response? I asked. Nolan chuckled. Oh, I'll handle that. Something polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. What does that look like? Simple. A declination letter stating that any further attempts to impede your access will be treated as continuation of unlawful encroachment. And a friendly reminder that forged petitions carry both civil and criminal penalties. I smiled, a thin, cold smile. They'll hate that. They'll panic, Nolan corrected, and panic makes them sloppy, which is good for us. I walked to the door, stepped out onto the porch, and looked down the long stretch of my road, still dusty, still unclaimed, still mine. Nolan, I said quietly, this road isn't just gravel. I know. It's my father's footsteps, my sweat, 20 years of work. They're not taking it. Not now, not ever. Nolan didn't say anything for a moment. Then, tomorrow, we move to Phase 2. What's Phase 2? We go after whoever helped them. I didn't need to ask who. I already knew. Paperwork this dirty didn't start in a cul-de-sac HOA office. It came from deeper inside the system. Briggs, Nolan added. You ready? I looked out across the land, my land, and felt that cold clarity settle into my bones again. I've been ready. The HOA wanted a war built on lies. Fine. I'd give them a war built on truth. Real truth. Not the kind that needs editing, staging, or a neck brace. By sunrise the next morning, I already knew defensive moves wouldn't cut it anymore. Sitting on my porch reacting to whatever clown show they sent next wasn't strategy. It was survival. And I didn't come this far just to survive. I walked into my office, opened the old metal footlocker where I kept the few things worth keeping, and pulled out a battered green notebook. Inside were numbers, frequencies, names. One of them, Luis Ortega, a man who once flew surveillance drones over Helmand Province and now ran a civilian mapping company out of Vegas. I hit dial. He picked up instantly. Gunny? It's time, I said. When do you want the birds up? As soon as you can get here. He didn't ask why. He never did. I'll be on the road in 10, he said. He wasn't lying. By 9:45 a.m., Luis rolled in with a black Tacoma full of gear. He stepped out wearing a backward ball cap, sunglasses, and a grin that said he enjoyed trouble a little too much. Briggs, he said, slapping my shoulder. Heard you pissed off an HOA. Not just any HOA, I replied. These people rewrite maps for fun. Luis laughed, but his eyes sharpened, soldier mode switching on. Show me the terrain. I led him to the ridge. Luis surveyed it like a hawk, hands on hips, head tilted, mind running calculations. This is perfect, he said. Wide lane, good wind, zero obstructions. He popped open the Tacoma's bed. Inside were 3 drones, bigger than the hobby toys you buy at Best Buy, matte black, long wings, military DNA in every angle. Jesus, Luis, I muttered. These are overkill. There's no such thing as overkill, he replied. There's only open fire and reload. He winked. He tapped a key, and the first drone lifted off like a ghost. Straight into the desert sky, quiet as a secret. Luis tapped the commands on a ruggedized laptop. A map bloomed on the screen. My land. The HOA's land. The stolen gate site. The exact angles where the fraudulent map had redrawn my road. The drone began its grid sweep. Perfect rectangles. Clean patterns. Thermal first, Luis said. Then 3D topography. On screen, washes, culverts, gravel spreads, and grade angles lit up like an X-ray. Every improvement I had made over the last 20 years was visible, undeniable. Briggs, Luis leaned closer. Look at this. A glowing line, my road, ran cleanly across my parcels, exactly as the original county map showed. Zero overlap with the HOA's claimed community corridor. They shifted the lot lines in their forged version, Luis said, by about 23 feet. Enough to pretend the road isn't mine. Yeah, but thermal mapping doesn't lie. The subsurface compaction matches 20 years of use. You built this. They didn't. He switched screens. Now, here's the fun part. The 3D mapping rendered. The HOA's checkpoint platform, now removed, had left clear soil disturbance. Its foundation imprint sat squarely inside your deeded land. He whistled. Got 'em. With the mapping done, we moved immediately to Phase 2, expanding the surveillance net. We installed 6 additional cameras, not the Walmart kind, but the type ranchers along the border use. Solar-powered, encrypted, wide angle with AI motion filtering. Luis set them on a grid. A grid? I asked. Grid pattern surveillance, he said. Same method we used overseas. No one steps near your land without leaving a trail. I nodded. And all data uploads to the cloud? 3 clouds, he said. 2 domestic, 1 offshore. If someone tries to wipe footage, they'll need a state-level cyber team. HOA won't stand a chance, Luis grinned. They can't even format a PDF correctly. Our conversation was cut short as a cloud of dust signaled another arrival. That's when the old brown sedan rolled up. It was Milton, my neighbor. He wore his faded Stetson and walked with that familiar, stubborn dignity. But today, he held something in his hands. A metal box, old, rusty, paint peeling. He lifted it gently, almost like carrying an urn. Boy, he said, I found something. Luis gave me a look. You know this guy? Yeah, I said softly. He's part of the land. Milton opened the box. Inside was a small Super 8 film reel, perfectly preserved in a cotton wrap. My heart kicked hard in my chest. I was cleaning the shed, Milton said. Don't know why I kept this old thing. Figured it didn't matter anymore. But seeing what those HOA folks are doing, well, I thought maybe it's time. He placed the film in my hands. I took this in '79, he said. Your daddy was spreading gravel with that old Chevy truck of his. You were sitting on the tailgate, swinging your legs, getting dust all over your overalls. The desert wind paused. Even Luis lowered his sunglasses. Milton continued. This road didn't come from no committee, no HOA board. It came from sweat. It came from your family. And there ain't a lie in this world strong enough to cover that truth. I swallowed hard. You sure this will play? I asked. He smiled, soft, warm, almost proud. Son, film doesn't lie. People do. Luis gently took the reel from my hand. We can digitize it, he said. 4K upscale, color correction, everything. If this shows construction on your parcel prior to their HOA charter date, it breaks their entire claim, I finished. Oh, it does more than break it, Luis said. It buries it. And just like that, Operation Freedom Road was officially underway. Drones scanning, cameras watching, historical footage backing my claim. A witness older than the HOA itself. This wasn't defense anymore. This wasn't survival. This was counteroffensive. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not relief, resolve, pure and simple. The HOA wanted a narrative. I was building a dossier, a war file, a truth bomb. And when the time came, I'd drop it right in their laps. Courtroom floor, fluorescent lights, judge's bench and all. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one they never trained for. By late afternoon, the pattern was undeniable. The HOA wasn't reconsidering or regrouping. They were accelerating. Their tone had changed. No more petty notes, no more shaky phone footage or staged theatrics. What moved now felt colder, quieter, planned. At 3:12 p.m., Grid A3 caught 2 silhouettes slipping beneath the west fence line. Not retirees. Not board members in sun hats. These were men who moved with purpose. Hired hands paid to show up, shut up, and get the job done. High visibility vests, tool belts, a laser theodolite mounted on a carbon tripod. One knelt and fired a green beam across my boundary, the line cutting through dust like a scalpel. The other held a tablet, monitoring readouts with the focus of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. Luis leaned over my shoulder, brows narrowing. "Calibration-grade equipment," he murmured. "This isn't HOA hobby work. And they're pointing it onto my land. Look at the angle," he said, tapping the screen. "They're measuring off their forged lot lines and pushing them 12 feet into yours. They're trying to match their fake map with actual measurements." I watched the laser glide across my soil. "They're retrofitting fraud to fit reality," I said. "Yeah," Luis muttered. "They're building a lie from the ground up." The men drove new stakes, fresh paint, clean points, right where the false survey claimed the boundary should be. Every impact echoed like a nail in a coffin. But all of it went straight into the cameras, time-stamped, geotagged, synced to 3 cloud servers. By sunset, they retreated the same way they came, quiet, efficient, no wasted motion. But the real attempt didn't begin until the world went dark. At 12:47 a.m., Grid C1 picked up heat signatures long before headlights cut through the night. 3 figures, moving careful, disciplined. The SUV rolled to a stop near the Southern Ditch Road. Engine off, lights off, doors opened quietly. These weren't neighbors. These weren't nervous board members. These were contractors comfortable operating in the dark. One carried a hard case. Another placed a transponder beacon into the dirt, its red LED pulsing in steady rhythm. The third set a reflective target plate and aligned it with the stakes driven earlier. Luis exhaled, voice low. "They're building a ghost map." The handheld unit they pulled out, a high-precision geospatial scanner, captured coordinates accurate to fractions of an inch. They weren't improvising. They weren't experimenting. They were formalizing the fraudulent lot line, anchoring it with professional-grade tools for the inevitable court battle. "They're not leaving this to chance," I said. "No," Luis replied. "This is organized boundary fraud. Every move they made landed in our system. Their gloved hands, their synchronized gestures, their measured steps along a line that wasn't real." After 15 minutes, they began packing up. The SUV's back door opened as the men loaded equipment, and then, as the vehicle shifted into gear, the interior dome light flickered on for a single heartbeat, just a brief glow, just enough. Luis froze the feed, backed it up, enhanced pixel clusters with quick keystrokes, bringing shape out of digital noise. A face formed, sharp, cold, eyes forward, watching her men work like a general, reviewing a battlefield. Karen Daly. Not standing at a podium with a fake smile, not filing complaints in daylight, but sitting in a dark SUV at 12:47 a.m., overseeing the creation of a fraudulent map. Luis let out a soft, disbelieving whistle. "Well, damn. That puts the HOA president at the scene of the crime. She can't blame the contractors now," I said. "Nope. That's conspiracy, coordination, and direct oversight. In this state," he tapped at the keyboard, "that's felony-level intent." The SUV eased forward, tires rolling silently over gravel as it disappeared down the road, swallowed by blackness. They believed the night would hide them. They believed distance would protect them. They believed shadows would keep their secrets. But the cameras had watched, the grid had recorded, and the truth had captured every second. They hadn't erased the line, they had crossed it. And when this footage hit a courtroom, they weren't walking out clean. Court days have a strange smell. Old varnish, stale air, burnt coffee, and nerves. People think battles are fought on dirt, in sand, in alleys, or with rifles. But the quiet ones in rooms like these, they're worse. Nobody hears you bleed here. The small county courtroom was already half full when Nolan and I walked in. Sunlight filtered through the narrow vertical blinds, striping the wooden benches. The HVAC rattled like it wanted to quit. And the judge, an older man named Porter, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His tired eyes said this was just another petty neighbor feud. Karen Daly sat across the aisle at the plaintiff's table. Pearls, powder blue blazer, a stage-managed expression of the wounded dignity. She didn't look at me. She looked above me, like I wasn't worth the effort. Her attorney, a silk-suited man named Dwyer, organized his paperwork with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a flawless procedure. When the clerk called our case, he stood with an elegance that made my stomach tighten. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here because my clients, model citizens, have endured intimidation, violence, and harassment from Mr. Briggs. He let Mr. Briggs hang in the air like a bad smell. He painted me as a volatile veteran, prone to escalation. He called Mason, the fake guard I'd dumped into the dirt, a licensed security officer. He described my bypass around the kiosk as reckless endangerment. He presented the HOA's forged county petition as if it were scripture. Then came the showmanship. He signaled, and an assistant rolled out a TV cart. We present drone footage, submitted by Mr. Briggs himself, showing unauthorized construction and road alteration without permit. My own footage lit up the screen. Me raking gravel, me clearing drainage, me fixing washouts. Perfectly innocent, perfectly damning. If you didn't know the law, Karen allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. When Dwyer finally sat, Nolan rose with the calm of a man who had already won. "Your Honor," he said, "with the court's permission, the defense will present 3 categories of evidence." Porter nodded mechanically. Nolan opened his first folder. Exhibit A, the original Bureau of Land Management Servitude record from 1963, establishing roadway 14B as a federally recognized private access route maintained by private funds. Judge Porter leaned forward a fraction. "Good. Exhibit B," Nolan continued, "is historical documentation proving continuous maintenance." He held up a small metal tin. I swallowed hard. He inserted the digitized Super 8 reel. The projector flickered. My father appeared, 46 years younger, shoveling crushed stone from a flatbed, his hat soaked in sweat. Me on the hood beside him, 5 years old, boots swinging, not a care in the world. The courtroom fell completely silent. This wasn't paperwork. This was memory, history, truth. When the lights came up again, even Porter's boredom had evaporated. "Exhibit C," Nolan said, voice lower now, "is evidence of intentional fraud." Luis's drone footage hit the screens. Nighttime surveying, laser theodolite, ghost map alignment, contractors pacing in a grid pattern. Then, the SUV. Dome light flicker, pause, enhancement. Karen Daly's face staring out of the rear seat like a hawk overseeing her prey. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Nolan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The HOA president supervising unauthorized nighttime surveying intended to falsify county records. This is illegal oversight, coordinated fraud, and direct involvement in boundary manipulation. Karen shot to her feet. That's taken completely out of... Porter slammed his gavel. "Ms. Daly, sit. Down." The tone made even me straighten. Then Porter turned to Dwyer. "Counselor," he said slowly, "do you have any explanation for why your client was present during illicit surveying?" This was the moment. Dwyer opened his mouth, stopped, looked at the screen again, then at Karen. He stepped an inch away from her, then another. He gently closed his folder like it contained radioactive material. "Your Honor," he said, voice suddenly dry, "counsel was unaware of the circumstances surrounding this footage. We were not informed of Ms. Daly's presence at that site. Translation, she lied to him, and he wasn't going to prison for her." Karen's face drained of color. Judge Porter inhaled sharply, then made his ruling with surgical precision. Effective immediately, roadway 14B is restored exclusively to the Briggs estate. The county petition is suspended pending a criminal investigation. "Ms. Daly," Karen flinched, "you are ordered not to leave the state until further notice." The room erupted in whispers. Karen sank into her chair, trembling. Not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that the world she'd controlled was crumbling right underneath her. And for the first time in months, I felt something like breath return to my lungs. The war wasn't over, but this was the beginning of the end. The news broke 3 days after the hearing. I was in the barn tightening a hinge on the tack room door when my phone buzzed. One text from Nolan. "Turn on Channel 7. I wiped my hands on a rag, walked inside, and clicked on the old TV mounted above the pantry. The screen crackled, then sharpened just in time for a live shot of Silver Ridge Estates. Police lights, 2 cruisers, a news van, and Karen Daly, powder blue blazer replaced with a wrinkled t-shirt, standing in her driveway with a face full of panic. A reporter's voice cut through the static. "Arrested this morning on charges of forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unlawful interference with private infrastructure." They handcuffed her gently, almost politely, But nothing could soften the humiliation. The moment the cuffs clicked, her composure shattered like glass. She spun toward the cameras, shouting something about political sabotage and misunderstood intentions, but her voice cracked, her hands shook, and she looked exactly like what she had once accused me of being: unstable, a poetic kind of justice. They put her into the cruiser, and for a brief second the camera zoomed in. Her lipstick smeared, her hair frayed, her eyes wide with disbelief. The HOA members who had once followed her like she was royalty stood on the sidewalk whispering, their perfect lawns behind them looking small and irrelevant. The screen cut back to the studio, but I didn't need more. It was done. The dominoes fell fast. The county launched a full audit. The HOA's financials were a graveyard of consulting fees, unreported PAC donations, and invoices paid to shell companies with names like Nevada Urban Safety Solutions, all tied to Karen. 3 board members resigned in a single afternoon. 2 fled the state, which only made them look guiltier, and the county revoked the HOA's legal charter pending prosecution. Silver Ridge Estates, once smug, self-righteous, and suffocating, collapsed like wet cardboard. By the following week, the kiosk and gate were gone. The concrete pad was jackhammered down to dust. The fake security patrols disappeared. Everything they had built on, lies evaporated. I didn't celebrate, not right away. There's a quiet ache that comes with winning a war you never wanted to fight. The adrenaline drains, the noise fades, and all that's left is the land, the only thing that makes sense. So, I did what my father would have done. I got to work. The settlement came through a month later. $330,000 for damages, legal fees, and loss of functional access to essential property infrastructure. Money wasn't the victory, but I put part of it to use. I had a concrete pad poured at the exact spot where HOA's stolen kiosk had been. I set a thick steel post into the center, one that wouldn't budge even if a truck rammed it. Then I mounted the sign. Black powder coat, raised letters, bold as truth. Private road, no access. Trespassers will be physically removed. See fee schedule. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I stepped back, hands on my hips, and watched the desert sun glint off the steel. The wind kicked dust across the gravel. In the distance, the mountains burned red in the last light of day. It felt right. That night, sitting on the porch with a bourbon in hand, I opened my laptop and launched the website I'd built during the long nights waiting for court dates. backoffmyland.com. I posted everything: drone footage, the forged petition, Karen's SUV at 12:47 a.m., templates for cease and desist letters, guides for property owners on how to fight HOA overreach, a whole section on BLM servitude rights with downloadable PDFs. I thought maybe a dozen ranchers would find it useful. By morning, the site had 2,000 members. By the end of the week, 12,000. People from all over the country shared their stories. Farmers in Utah fighting phantom easements, retirees in Arizona dealing with fake HOA cops, families in Colorado getting hit with fraudulent fines. The little guy had finally found a voice, and somehow, I'd handed them the microphone. 2 weeks later, I hiked up to the ridge overlooking my 9-mile road. The sun was setting behind the mountains, turning the desert gold. The road stretched out beneath me, quiet, honest, familiar, my road, my land, my inheritance. I raised my glass toward the horizon. To Dad, I said. To Milton. To every stubborn soul who refused to roll over. I stood there until the sky dimmed and the first stars broke through. The land didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its silence was enough. Proof that some things are worth defending. Proof that the truth still matters. Proof that a man who knows what's his and refuses to back down can still win in this world. I finished the bourbon, breathed in the desert air, and walked back down toward home. Freedom Road waiting behind me, and not a gate in sight.